engine, the work engine of the Industrial Revolution, which immeasurably increased men's ability to manufacture the goods their lives required. Edward Jenner, as a second example, created a vaccine for smallpox, one of history's deadliest killers, perhaps the deadliest killer of all in terms of sheer numbers. George Stephenson pioneered the design of locomotives and construction of railroads. All of these thinkers and hundreds more were commoners whose minds and activities would have been stifled under the ancien regime that continued to hold sway on the European continent. It was Britain's far greater political economic freedom that provided the social conditions her most creative minds required to promote unprecedented material progress. In the 19th century, based on advances in applied science, technology, industry, medicine, and agriculture made possible by the liberation of the human mind, the standard of living increased dramatically. The life expectancy rose significantly from the low 30s that it had been under the pre-capitalist systems, and Europe's population in the 19th century roughly tripled. In Great Britain, the freest European nation, per capita living standards rose during the 19th century, while the population more than tripled. Now I want to pause there for a second, because that is a staggering statistic, especially given the poverty, the destitution that is dominant worldwide, both today and historically in all of the non-capitalist systems. Per capita income in Britain in the 19th century rose while the population more than tripled. I mean, what a tribute that is to the productive powers of industrial capitalism. That is just extraordinary, and taken for granted, I think, by everybody who's born and raised in one of the capitalist countries today. Furthermore, British real wages in the decade 1781 to 1851, real wages, of course, meaning income measured in terms of purchasing power of what individuals can buy with their money. British real wages in that 70-year period of 1780s to 1850s showed an average increase in excess of 60% for farm workers, over 86% for blue-collar workers, and more than 140% for all workers, including white-collar ones. One practical result of the rise in real income was the end of the ages-old practice of child labor. For now, mother and father were able to support their children without the need for the kids to provide income. Child labor exists today and in a widespread form only in the non-capitalist third world and throughout the non-capitalist third world, like everywhere. In the United States, economic progress was even more dramatic. Capitalism and the technological industrial revolution reached their full fruition there in the final third of the 19th century. Advances such as Cyrus McCormick's Reaper, Samuel Morse's telegraph, Alexander Graham Bell's telephone, Thomas Edison's electric lighting system, Henry Ford's mass production of automobiles, the Wright brothers' airplanes, and 1,000 other devices helped establish America as the most progressive and the wealthiest society of history. Per capita living standards in America doubled between 1790 and 1860, and then doubled again between 1865 and 1915. This at a time when the country absorbed millions of destitute immigrants from Ireland, Sicily, and Eastern Europe. America's unprecedented productivity, led by such giants of industry as Carnegie, Rockefeller, Hill, Harriman, et al., Morgan, kept American output so far ahead of population growth that the country's high living standards were becoming legendary as early as the turn of the 20th century. Capitalist America was known as the land of opportunity, and still is. Part of the revolution in productivity brought about by capitalism was that famine, the scourge of all non-capitalist systems, both historically and currently, was wiped out in the free world. Advances in both agricultural science and technology are responsible for the tremendous abundance of food produced in America and other Western countries. And I think we are today in America proudly the fattest people of history. And again, given the famine that's been so widespread throughout the non-capitalist world historically and currently, that is something to be proud of. There has never been a famine in the history of the United States, ever. All of my research and all the research I've done on capitalism and its history in the last few years, I've been unable to find the existence of a famine in any capitalist country, ever, anywhere, in the last 200 years since capitalism was born in Great Britain in the late 18th century, not in North America, not in Europe, and not in Asia. The significance of this fact, I think, is too often overlooked, because in less than a century, capitalism proved mistaken the Malthusian doctrine that population growth inevitably outstrips food production. Malthus is tragically correct, however, regarding all non-capitalist societies. It's so interesting. Malthus, publishing in 1798, in the early days of the Industrial Revolution, publishing his essay on population, predicting that population growth would inevitably outstrip food production, and that then people would inevitably starve. And he's writing, it's so ironic, he's writing at the very historical epoch that is going to show him wrong. That capitalism's advances in agricultural science and agricultural technology grow so much food that the people in the capitalist countries, especially in America, are not only fat, but our pets are fat. Yeah, we export. I have an 18-pound Tomcat, so I know that for. I know that for sure. We export food all over the world. We throw food out. The U.S. government pays American farmers not to grow food. It's unbelievable. It really shows what worldwide capitalism could accomplish. The question of what's the Earth's carrying capacity? How many billions of people could be properly fed? At least if you consider Burger King and Taco Hell, proper sources of food. But how many people could get enough food if you had global capitalism? Is an interesting question. Further, regarding freedom in the Western world led to more than people putting on weight. It led to profound moral results. The principle of individual rights that forms the foundation of capitalism, known in the 18th century as the rights of man, led to an abolitionist movement, first in Britain, then in France and America, that succeeded in the 19th century in abolishing the ages-old worldwide horror of human slavery. Abolished it in the Western world, anyway. And by the way, I don't think Great Britain has really gotten the credit that it deserves historically for leading the charge against both slavery and the slave trade. And to all those objectivist filmmakers out there, if you want an idea for an epic film, study the British war against slavery and the slave trade, and just think of the extraordinary heroism of this. I give you that for the same price. Additionally, the principle of individual rights gave the free countries of the West the moral courage to stand tall against the monstrous evils of collectivist dictatorships in the 20th century. And in those epic battles between freedom and totalitarianism that formed the most momentous events of that century, the overwhelming technological and industrial strength created by capitalism enabled the free world to defeat first the National Socialists in World War II and then the Communists in the Cold War. And the free nations succeeded in establishing a network of trade relations that was the freest of history, beginning with the Western countries and gradually expanded around the globe. What today is known, of course, as globalization, but the real name is international free trade. The movement toward international free trade promoted peace among the participating nations as well as mutually increased prosperity. England and France, for example, bitter military foes for centuries, in the historic Commercial Treaty of 1860, removed many trade barriers between those two countries, an early and important step in bringing lasting peace between them. Richard Cobden, the great 19th century advocate of capitalism and free trade, was instrumental in getting the treaty ratified. In a letter to William Gladstone, Britain's pro-freedom, anti-imperialist prime minister, Cobden wrote that free trade between England and France and the resultant satisfaction of each other's wants was the means of, quote, counteracting the antagonisms of language and race, unquote. This goal was so important, Cobden wrote in another letter to Gladstone, that, quote, to improve the moral and political relations between France and England by bringing them into increased commercial dependence, I would walk barefoot from Calais to Paris, unquote. The Revolutionary Code of Individual Rights and Political Economic Freedom transfigured the Western world in the 19th century. But tragically, the rest of the globe remained mired in tribalism, dictatorship, endless savage warfare, and extreme backwardness. In the 1960s, large parts of Asia, Africa, and South America were as destitute and famine-ridden as was pre-capitalist Europe. Indeed, today, early in the 21st century, Many nations of the third world possess per capita incomes below $300. Below